Karen and Andy have always had difficulty making ends meet. On the other hand, Karen puts her son Mike ahead of anything else. She had not anticipated Andy's opposition when she proposed selling his unused automobile to pay for Mike's care. Nonetheless, when she opened the trunk, she found out his stunning reason. But why did Andy have such strong feelings about not selling the unusual car? So, what exactly was Karen's huge revelation after searching the trunk of the car? What will the future hold for this family and their little son, who is just 3 years old? After much procrastination, Karen entered the storage facility where her husband had parked the automobile. I don't see why it was so hard for her to get there. Her husband clearly didn't want her to see this automobile. But there was nothing out of the ordinary about it. However, she eventually skirted it. When Karen opened the car's trunk, she was taken aback by what she saw. Fearing what may be lurking within, she became very anxious. All at once, she began recalling a plethora of disparate details. Everything her spouse did was out of the ordinary, from the quarrel to the bizarre explanations. Karen, her hands trembling, told her son to wait while she unlocked the trunk. When she pushed on it, it opened up and the contents were exposed. Karen just couldn't believe it. But a little history is needed to appreciate the significance of this discovery. Karen and Andy have been married for 5 years, and they have a son, Allison, who is 3 years old. They've known each other for over a decade, and they've always had the same unshakable feeling that they were destined to be together. However, a lot can happen in 10 years. They have a humble but happy existence. Andy goes to work, while Karen stays at home with their son Mike and takes care of the household. Although the family of 4 does not have a lot of disposable income, they do their best to make ends meet. And Karen is not the whiny sort. However, Karen and Andy have what she considers to be a great relationship, yet they often go their own ways. They both have a strong sense of independence and value their alone time. This has been the case from the beginning of their relationship, and it has caused concern in the past. There's this notion that couples should want to spend all of their time together. However, the pair has always been successful because to their ability to maintain their distinct selves. Karen, however, will quickly learn that her assumptions regarding Andy's activities during his alone time are greatly mistaken. Karen enjoys spending her free time mostly with her loved ones. While Allison often participates with her, there have been several instances when she has remained at home to be with her dad instead. They spend much of their time together playing at home or, on beautiful days, going on walks together. That's the story they're telling Karen. Anyhow, Karen has always believed that open lines of communication are essential to the success of any relationship. Thus, she has no problem sharing details about her solo activities. Andy, on the other hand, has always been far less forthcoming regarding his whereabouts and activities when absent. The question began to arise in Karen's mind. Karen isn't sure Andy is trying to keep anything from her. He discusses everything with her, but he seldom provides specifics. Example, he'd say, "I went fishing," but wouldn't elaborate on what he caught. In their conversations, he never gives her any more than the absolute minimum of information. Karen was feeling really down about this. This was always a little disheartening to Karen. Andy's overall lack of chattiness is the one and only major drawback in her eyes. She enjoys the connection overall, but she started to feel irritated by the fact that she needed to keep the chats going. Karen had anticipated that Andy would modify his chatty ways after the birth of their son Mike, but instead he became even more chatty. Andy's distance from Karen became more apparent. She was beginning to worry that it was damaging their friendship. She was confused as to whether he had begun to lose interest in her, or was concealing something from her. She was still in the dark about his solo activities, and trying to get further details out of him was fruitless. Her anxiety levels continued to rise. Karen's need to discuss this with Andy and get an explanation became greater daily. But she always managed to put the thought out of her mind again. Karen had excellent reason to believe that sharing her concerns with Andy would be a poor decision. She was terrified of doing anything to jeopardize their connection. Andy may no longer have been a decent husband to her, but he was clearly devoted to raising their son Mike. Furthermore, without his salary, she would be unable to make ends meet. While Andy was still bringing in some cash, the family's financial condition was steadily deteriorating. With their child's development came more expenses, while Andy's income remained stagnant. In fact, it's the exact reverse. Without Karen's knowledge, he had been working one less day every week. Karen found this out when she went to the grocery store to make a purchase at the end of the month and discovered she had run out of money. Karen would never make a purchase that would put them in the red since she carefully planned out every purchase based on their budget. This month she had not even come close to going over her budget. She spoke her mind to Andy about it. Andy was quick to defend himself when Karen informed him of her discoveries. He confided in her that he'd been feeling overworked for the last several months and that he needed some alone time to avoid burnout. Karen's anger about her inability to stock the pantry persisted, of course. Karen would have some grasp on this concept. It must have been challenging for Andy to be the only breadwinner for his family. Her main issue was, though, that Andy, as was so often the case, failed to tell her this. Her astonishment was well-founded when she saw Andy's response. Karen's fury and, in his view, unwarranted suspicion irritated him. Always respectful of one another's personal space, Karen had never brought up his need for privacy before. Then why did this become a major issue out of the blue? To Andy, it seemed like she was intruding on his alone time. For this reason, they had a heated quarrel. Karen couldn't believe Andy was publicly opposing her. She was always open and honest about her private life, and she would fill him in if he showed interest. Andy finally broke up the fight by saying that Karen had no right to criticize his professional judgment if she wasn't contributing to the household income. Karen was very offended by this remark and fled the scene in tears. For months, she had been actively seeking employment, ever since they saw a change for the worse in their financial status. However, her previous failures might be attributed to her limited training and education. She had a hard time with this for a very long time. Karen grew raised in a home where schooling was never prioritized. Karen was the last of 5 siblings. Karen's life was quite different from that of her siblings, who all went on to college and successful careers. However, Karen's parents had other ideas for their daughter. It was always assumed that Karen would take care of them in old age. They wouldn't let her go to school, and she was too busy helping out around the home to hold down a job, cleaning and preparing meals for her parents, who felt entitled to retire and put their feet up. All the way up until Karen turned 18. This continued. She had reached an age when she could make certain choices on her own, and the law could not just send her back home. They had no idea she was planned to leave until the day after her birthday, but she had been plotting her escape for some time. Karen did not worry about how upset her parents were with her. She would not be returning. During the first several months, she lived mostly at her siblings' places. She even spent time at a homeless shelter, where she saw and heard things she hoped she'd never see or hear again. But once she started dating Andy, it all changed. Karen and her sister were enjoying a drink at the pub when a gorgeous young guy walked up to them. She fell in love with him at first sight, and they were living together within weeks of their first meeting. Back then, the future held such promise. While the transition to living together after just a few weeks presents many problems, it seems that Karen and Andy have overcome them well. Karen felt like luck was finally on her side when she found out she was expecting Allison, but now she sensed that everything was in danger. Karen eventually regained her composure and returned downstairs to resume her talk with Andy, only to find that he had already left. I left a letter on the counter that said, "I apologize for my words, just went out fishing by myself." Karen was disappointed that he had departed without making amends, but an apology was more than she had ever gotten in the past. The couple's financial predicament worsened rapidly during the subsequent 2 weeks. Karen was scheming out a way to increase revenue without having Andy put in extra hours. To do so, she decided to sell some of her possessions, since this seemed to be her only viable option. Plus, she was aware of the best place to begin. She had learned from Andy that he had a parked vehicle he no longer needed. His standard line was that he was holding on to it out of nostalgia for their first automobile together. Karen had suggested they sell it previously, but he had always refused. However, this was before they started having financial difficulties. Karen felt certain Andy would be more receptive to the idea if she brought it up now. With their 3-year-old kid now in the world, and him working less, he realized they really needed the money. But Karen was completely taken aback by Andy's response. Andy was completely uninterested in the prospect of parting with his old automobile. Karen thought she had Andy convinced with her reasons, but he still wouldn't budge. Karen was really upset since he never provided any compelling justifications for his actions. That was a definitive negative. Andy was unable to provide her with any viable options when she questioned him about them. When Karen recommended that they both obtain jobs, he repeated his same old refrain about how he wasn't interested in working full-time. When their screaming kid entered the room, they resumed their quarrel. The girl was terrified by the commotion below and had been startled up by the constant shouting. It wasn't the first time Allison had overheard her parents arguing, and Karen was concerned about how her sister might see her parents. As soon as Karen's son woke up, she grabbed him up and took him back to bed. She encouraged her not to worry about it and attempted to ease her anxiety. Nonetheless, Kim persisted in pressing the issue, asking again what had sparked the conflict between her and her father. She and Andy were finished talking about it for the time being, but had come to no conclusions. Karen was up all night processing what had occurred. She was thinking about getting a divorce from Andy and moving away with their kid. However, she has nowhere to go. They were broke and things were only going to get worse from there. Moreover, there was an impression that she could not dismiss. In spite of everything, she still loved Andy and didn't want to leave him, she realized. And yet she was also aware that things could not keep going in the same direction they were. There had to be a shift, and by the time the sun was almost up again, Karen had made up her mind. As Andy would be at work, she would visit the storage facility. She would sneakily do this behind his back. Karen was sure that this was the best option for her loved ones. She retrieved Andy's keys from the area, she remembered him storing them, and departed with Allison. Where Andy kept his automobile in storage was information she had. Once she had even seen the bill for it. Karen had waited for a long time to enter, but the worker who was guarding the door refused to let her in. Given that she shared her husband's last name, Karen reasoned that she would have free access to the storage facility. However, she was gravely incorrect. It seems Andy had previously specified that only he be allowed access to the storage area. Karen did her best to persuade the guard, but she was unsuccessful. But she persisted in being a bother. Since the worker was too lazy to clean up his own mess, the manager was eventually summoned. The management didn't appear to give a hoot. Karen presented identification as Andy's wife and the keys to the storage container, and the guard let her in. Their regular policy allowed anybody with the key and ID to enter, but he looked in no mood for a lengthy debate. Karen was given pause by it all. Could Andy have guessed that she'd be on her way and phoned ahead? Or were these guidelines in place before he ever bought the storage locker? What exactly was he trying to keep from her? There's nothing unusual about this vehicle, right? When you think about it, does the automobile even factor into the equation? Once Karen was led in the appropriate way, the worker left her to investigate the storage area on her own. Not until, however, did he reveal another piece of shocking news to her. Andy, it turned out, had been a regular visitor for over 3 years, dropping in at least once a week. Also, nowadays much more so than usual. He would visit on the day he didn't have to work, and he'd stay there for a good chunk of the day. Karen had inquired as to the employee's knowledge of her husband's whereabouts in the room, but the worker was clueless. As long as the customer's use of the device was lawful, it was none of their concern. Since the worker had gone back toward the building's entrance, Karen was alone in front of her husband's storage unit. The woman's hands were beginning to tremble. Were their monetary woes really going to be solved by this? Karen attempted to unlock the storage unit by inserting the key in the lock. Karen had to work hard to lift the hefty door. Mike, even at his young age, wanted to pitch in. Karen was concerned that if anybody saw them stumbling about, they would assume they weren't welcome. Pushing the door up allowed Karen to turn on the light and see what was inside the storage container. The huge black automobile she had considered selling for the last several days was sitting in the center of the storage facility. As she looked at it, she was still perplexed as to why Andy was so opposed to selling it. They already owned a much superior automobile, and this one was in terrible condition. There were other things in the garage besides the rusty black automobile. There was a wooden structure against the wall that she recognized but could not identify. A camera mounted on a tripod stood next to a box that seemed to be hiding something big and rectangular in the corner. Had someone been keeping an eye on them? It was completely opaque to Karen, and she had no clue what she was seeing. She entered the storage area and headed for the enormous item under the gray tarp in the unit's corner. Before she could get there, however, something else grabbed her attention and caused her to gasp for breath. She then urged Allison to leave the storage facility. She saw a handprint and crimson streaks on the trunk handle of the black automobile. When Karen envisioned the future, she instantly saw the worst-case scenario. Is it possible that this is what she suspected? She slammed her fist on the trunk of the vehicle, her pulse pounding. Karen was confused for a moment, but then she realized it was a collection of art equipment. She felt tremendous gratitude that it wasn't more serious. Feeling bewildered, she went around and removed the tarps from the enormous object, displaying its curiously formed contents. It was shown to be a large quantity of canvas sheets. While many of them seemed to be disused, she did find a few that had been freshly painted, and the paintings were really decent, too. Do you think Andy crafted these? If that's the case, however, then why did he keep his skill from her? She called Andy, still bewildered, to tell him the truth about what she'd done and what she was intending to do. Since there was no use in denial and she needed clarification, Andy sighed heavily at hearing the news and began hesitantly to describe the issue to Karen. He'd wanted to be an artist for years, but with their money problems, he knew Karen would never let him pursue it. However, he had been attempting to earn a living as an artist for the last 3 years. Sad to say, he's had little success until lately. In recent months, he has seen an uptick in requests for his work after someone posted and praised it online. In light of this, he had begun taking off one day from his work week. When the money arrived, he intended to inform Karen. Hearing this, Karen had a wide range of feelings, but largely relief. That night, they resolved their differences by talking it out more. Andy was finally able to return home and begin painting, and Karen was able to sell the automobile. As Andy's paintings became increasingly well-known, he was able to make up for his reduced salary and even increase his savings. Everyone in the family was doing better than they had in a long time, and they were all happy now that they had a chance to get back on their feet.